Hi, I'm Sarah from The Upcoming. Such a pleasure to speak to you today. Thanks so much for taking the time. Huge congrats on the show. Maybe for people who don't know anything about it, can you give us a brief intro? What can they expect when they go in to watch We Were Liars?
We Were Liars is a story about a very wealthy and prominent American family who spends their summers on a private island. And the eldest granddaughter has a traumatic accident one summer, and the next summer she comes back with some questions because she has amnesia about what happens to her. So all the people that she loves the most are on this island, and she knows that someone isn't telling her the truth.
That's very good. I was just telling Emily how hard it is to encapsulate the show in that one single sentence.
It's a love.
You nailed it. I loved it.
I forgot the love story part. It's a love story. It's a mystery. It's a family drama. I think part of the joy of doing this was that we got to dabble in all the things that we love to watch.
Yeah, I was thinking that there's just so many kind of sort of genre elements to it. You've kind of got this, coming of age almost story, like you say, a love story, but then this kind of undercurrent of a thriller, like Gone Girl or something like that. So maybe you can talk us through kind of the roots of the story, and also, the way sort of like the structure of a fairy tale is in there too. What was the starting point?
But we should begin the conversation about the origins of the story with Emily Lockhart, who wrote the novel 10 years ago. So, because we all fell in love with it as fans, as writers over here, we fell in love with it before we even had anything to do with it. And so, yes, why don't you tell us about the roots of it all?
We Were Liars is set on a private island off the coast of Massachusetts, right? That's owned by one family. And I really started with that location. I've never been to a private island, but I made it up. And I was interested in what would happen with a group of teenagers who were spending summer after summer in a world of their own, and what that friendship would look like, and then what would happen if two of them fell in love, and then what would happen if something terrible happened, right? So, once you put your characters on an isolated island, probably some terrible stuff is going to happen. So,
and it does.
And it does. So it's really started with that setting.
I think that the fairy tale element of it's very prominent in the books, and it's really fun to play with because we all grow up with certain fairy tales, princesses and princes. And then when you dig in and you read sort of like the grim original versions of it, they're very dark. And so a lot of the storytelling was sort of about peeling back this idea of being, the king of this little realm. And then what does that actually look like? And how does, power rot a little bit?
And maybe you can tell us about how, when you first read the book, did you already have in mind, oh my God, this could just work so well on screen? And what was your initial reaction to reading it?
I read it in 2014, and the first thing that I did was tweet Emily Lockhart, who I had never met or spoken to, and just be like, thank you for writing this beautiful thing. I love it so much. And the second thing that I did was give the book to Julie to read on her vacation. But no, I don't think at that moment, it's actually a very difficult book to adapt because it lives very deeply in the sort of inner turmoil of this girl's mind, which it's a puzzle to try to figure out how to project that on screen in a way that isn't annoying. It also has a lot of different timelines. We had to figure out how to unravel them and sort of make it make sense for a viewer. But I'm glad we figured it out.
Yeah.
It took us a while, but
I've read, I can count on one hand the amount of books I've read where I cried so hard reading the book that my contacts fell out of my eyes. I flushed them out of my own eyes with my tears, and this was one of them.
And what was the collaboration like between you? Because of course it's impossible to capture everything that's on the page on screen. So perhaps you had some conversations right off the bat about the key things that you wanted to keep in there. And then of course some bits you might have to leave out. What was that whole process like?
We were very aligned with what we wanted to capture, which was we wanted to make sure that the show felt as much like the experience of reading the book as possible, the feels of it, the vibes. We negotiated along the way what we were willing to change a little bit, season a little differently. And but the beautiful part was we really, 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 really wanted to make sure that feeling you got when you read We Were Liars for the first time showed up on the screen.
I think we got so lucky because Emily was in the writer's room with us for 10 weeks during sort of our development process. So we got to watch her face as we pitched ideas. She never like said, no, you can't do that. But sometimes you'd see on her face like, oh, maybe we're going the right direction, very politely. But we also got access to her brain. You know, one thing that's different in the show is that Johnny comes out to his friends, and that was born out of, you know, us wanting to make sure that we had representation in the show and that the group of teenagers looked like teenagers look today. But also Emily sort of giving us the okay to make that adjustment because it felt true to the character that she had written. She, you know, there is a world in which in the future, in the version of Johnny from the novels might make those discovery about himself. And Emily kind of let us go on our merry way that way.
He avoids every question about his romantic life. He always just diverts it in the novel. And so I felt like he had feelings that he wasn't ready to share or even ready to explore yet. And so what you guys did with that character is just kind of bring that exploration forward.
It's also, you know, there are 10 years between when you wrote the book and when we wrote the show, and teens are different. So we got to sort of say, who would this person be today? That might be a little different, but we really did get a lot of approval from Emily, and you know, some help navigating when we maybe were going in the wrong direction. I think that I'll speak mostly for myself and for Julie, but most of the things that are in the book that aren't in the show weren't things that we didn't love. It was we would have loved to do every single thing in the book, but you know, it's a different medium.
They're there. It's all there in spirit.
Yeah, and so, but the great thing was that in that process, we also got to add a lot.
Yeah.
And it was, hopefully that makes it a special watch for even for viewers who are like really very want to see very faithful to the novel. They'll get more.
It will.
You know, what a phenomenal cast. Particularly Emily as Cadence right at the center of it. And, you know, so how did you work specifically with her, I guess, to kind of chart this arc that her character goes on? And I guess it's through her that we have all these questions raised about memory, about perception. And, you know, we're with her on that journey. So why was she the most important person to cast? And what was it like working with her?
Well, she's in about 97% of the show. In fact, the last month we shot, she was in absolutely every scene, every day, day in, day out. So she needed to have the stamina to survive that adventure. The beautiful thing about Emily Ellen Lind is that she really does put an incredible amount of thought into portraying Cadence, both in her bright, sort of happy, aspirational, blonde Cadence mode, and then the darker, traumatized PTSD, brown-haired Cadence mode. It reminded me, frankly, a lot of working with Nina Dobrev back in the Vampire Diaries, as she made the distinctions between Elena and Catherine, and seeing the amount of really intelligent work that went into that was great, and she really did a good job.
You know, her scene partner a lot of the time was Shubham Maheshwari, who's playing Gat. And I know that he felt really, really supported by her because he was new to the screen and she's very experienced. And I think she really took the time to rehearse with him and support him in giving an amazing performance. Yeah. And I think that made our show so much better.
Absolutely.
And ultimately, what do you hope people take away from watching this show? And I think it's one of these great ones that, you know, it's obviously kind of a young adult target audience, but it really kind of appeals to a broader audience too. And, you know, as an older person like me, you know, it sort of takes me back a bit to my youth, but you are also raising all these questions about privilege, what it means to be in one of those sort of tight-knit friendship groups, which, you know, can seem very alluring, but maybe has its dark sides. And so what do you hope people take away?
The lesson that some of the characters learn from this show is not necessarily the lesson that the audience learns. I also hope, you know, one of the things in the adaptation that we did was really flesh out and sort of give a new perspective to the adult characters. And at this particular moment in time, I hope that the show makes people think about complicity and the way that if you see something that's wrong, just because the wrong isn't being done to you, maybe you should do something about it and not pass that fight on to the next generation.
Absolutely. I think it's a generational story about a multi-generational family that has been making the same mistake over and over again. And that mistake is compounding generation to generation to causing actually some true damage and some pain. And, and so I hope what people take away from this is the understanding that you can step up and say something and do something. You may not do it the right way, but like Carina said, sitting and doing nothing is not the answer.
I just hope their jaws drop to the floor.
Yes. Big feels.
And I hope they have fun.
A bit of everything. I'm out of time, unfortunately, but thank you so much for sharing all that with me. And I cannot wait for everyone else to see where we lies. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank
Great
you.
questions.